Okay, so in the last video we talked about how we were going to put it together, where those dimensions came from, what wood we're going to use, and I want to let you know that most of this stuff is readily available at wherever you live, wherever that may be. So all of the lumber, the poplar and the plywood we bought at our local hardware store. I ended up getting that at, I think, at Lowe's. I ended up having it all pre-cut. So the plywood that came in a 4x8 sheet, I went in there and had it pre-cut by their panel cutting saw. Before I did that, so backing up a little bit, I needed to know how do I dimension these parts. So okay, I know my width, my heights, my depths. I figured all that stuff out in our last video, and measuring and all that. So I kind of had an idea of what I wanted this thing to look like. What do I do from there? Well, the next thing I did was I broke out my components and it separated them from what were the hardwood components, what were the poplar boards, and then what were the plywood boards. So my plywoods in this particular example would be my two sides and my top, and then also each of my shelves. And let me show you what one of these shelves look like, since we didn't discuss that in the last video. But the shelf literally is a piece of plywood, and to the front of it I have glued a piece of poplar. All right, so it's almost like a little I-beam in front. So it sits in a groove. Whoop. The plywood sits in a groove in the poplar, and what this allows us to do is this poplar board here gives the appearance that the shelf is thicker. It's a thicker piece of wood, and by sort of integrating it into the plywood, it also adds some rigidity and strength. So as I put heavier and heavier things on here, it'll prevent this plywood board from sagging over time. It'll keep it nice and straight. So our plywood parts are the sides of our built-ins, the top of our built-in, and each of our shelves. And then our hardwood components, again, are our front frame and that wooden strip we have in the back for screwing into, and then the front strip of those shelves. And that's it. So I basically came up with a list of parts, came up with what I knew the dimensions would be, and I put them in a website called Optimalon. So there's a bunch of different resources you can use to come up with the cut sheets for all this stuff, but Optimalon.com allows you to enter each of your parts you have by sort of species. So you'll have a list of parts in plywood, you have a list of parts in hardwood, you enter the dimensions and the quantities of each of those, and then you basically hit run, and it tells you how many of each board you need. So I need, how many sheets of 4x8 plywood do I need? How many sheets of, or how many 4x8s or 1x4x8 pieces of poplar do I need? And so then you can take that, and that's your shopping list, and you can go to you can go to Lowe's and buy all your stuff, and then it also produces a cut sheet. So you know in that 4x8 sheet of plywood where your parts are all cut out of. To help you sort of get over that, or make that easier for you, I have a calculator I designed when we built our office built-ins, and it allows you to enter the overall widths and dimensions or width, height, depth of all that stuff of a built-in cabinet you want to build, and it spits out the parts list for you. So that's free. It's already on my website. That's on ourhomefromscratch.com/plans, and then scroll down to the free built-in calculator. So that's a set of plans you can follow, and you'll be able to modify them to get something very similar to these cabinets. So once we had our lumber brought home from Lowe's, we got started by cutting the plywood parts out. So I took that cut sheet, I turned on my table saw, and I ran through those boards and cut them down to the final dimensions per that parts list. My table saw is not a seriously over-the-top table saw. If you've been following me for a while, then you know that it's a very basic table saw. It's a Hitachi. Probably cost me $200, and I've integrated it into a larger workstation. So I have plans for that workstation, but the point here is it's not a professional cabinet saw. It's not a professional saw you'd see in a cabinet or a carpentry shop. It's your average DIYer home improvement. It's a contractor grade table saw, so it's light enough to throw in a car, and it's not been bad. It's not awesome, it's not great, but it gets the job done. And that's what I built these out of. That's what I built the kitchen cabinets in my first home out of. That's all you need. So that's how we cut the plywood parts out. Moving on to our hardwood boards, they were also cut to a certain width, and then I would cut them to the final length using this miter saw. And this is a standard contractor grade. This is a DeWalt miter saw. I got this at a Black Friday sale a few years ago. This is a compound sliding. You know, it's got some features that are nice. Features you don't need for this. For this particular cabinet build, all we need are straight cuts. So any old chop saw with a good quality, sharp blade on there will do fine. More teeth, you want more teeth the better, so you want something with 60 or 80 teeth. That'll get you a nice clean cut. So all of our cuts to length were used on this miter saw. So that's cutting all the parts out. So putting it together, I needed to add a couple grooves in some locations. So there's two ways you can add grooves. One way to do it is with a router. So I just picked up this router. I just did a review and unboxing of this router. That's on YouTube. This is a Ryobi. It cost me $100, and I bought a 3/4 inch cutting bit for it. And you'll see what I did is I just used that router to add a groove to the top of the cabinets. And that groove is where the top board sits in. So that can be done using a router. The other groove we add into this project was in the front of the shelf boards, so the shelf can sit into a groove in the shelf fronts, and also these face frame boards. So the fronts of the cabinet, I attach the cabinet box to the face frame using grooves. So I allow the sides of the board to sit in some grooves. Those grooves I machined on the table saw, and you could do that with what's called a dado blade, and that's a fancy term for a bunch of blades that you stack together for wider and wider cuts. So what I did, because my table saw is, again, it's not a top-of-the-line table saw, it's a run-of-the-mill table saw, I was able to get my board stacked together to about 3/8 of an inch. So I ran them once, moved the fence back a little bit, ran them again to a second time, then that got me a full 3/4 inch wide groove. And that allowed me to attach my face frame, the front of the cabinet, to the box of the cabinet. And with a little bit of wood glue and some clamps, the cabinet was pretty much assembled. Putting the face frame together, backing up a little bit, the face frame was put together just using some pocket screws. Pocket screws, if you haven't heard of these things yet, are a marvelous little invention, and all you need is a drill bit and a pocket hole jig. So you pre-drill a couple holes in your hardwood boards, and then you use a clamp to line everything up, and you pull them together with a pocket screw. And so your frame gets assembled that way, and then boom, attached to the box. So that's really it. There's not much more to building these cabinets than some basic woodworking tools using straight cuts, and then maybe a router or a table saw with some dado blades stacked on there to give you some of your machining and stuff. So that's all I used to build these cabinets. Probably spent a couple $100 in parts between just the lumber. It was probably under $200. A sheet of plywood, I used one sheet of plywood, $50. I think the hardwood for the poplar was maybe another $50 to $100, and that's it. And then you're looking at just the cost of paint and that sort of thing. So that's it for this video. In the next video, we're going to talk about some of the finishing techniques and products you can use so you can get a higher quality finish on either a paint or a stain project. And that will end this little brief cabinet building series we have, and then we'll get into opening enrollment for the Cabinets from Scratch series. So we'll see you in the next video.